You want to put a syndication or a fund together, well, you probably want to get paid for the work you're doing, right? So in this video, we're going to talk about the different fees and split structures that exist, but we're also going to talk about why I think it's important to separate the two in your thought process. When we think about fees, I think the most important thing is think about it like your pay. It's the pay that you get for the actual work that you're doing. So that pay itself needs to be commensurate with not only the amount of work that's involved, but also your experience level and time spent away. Now, if you were doing all the accounting, you should get paid for that. And here, you're oftentimes doing different things like the asset management, or you're putting together the acquisition or a disposition of specific assets. So you need to be compensated for those. So let's go through the basic fees that I see in most of my structures. And in this case, we're going to really probably be talking more about real estate fees, just because in a real estate syndication context, because that's more commonly seen as having the more amount of fees. So let's talk about those. So the first type of fee is, of course, an asset management fee. When we talk about asset management, that is the fee that you should be earning for the work that you're doing in order to keep the asset itself managed, or the assets managed. So it's keeping that fund going. This is things like investor relations. It's things like the back-end accounting before you hand it off to an accountant. It's the keeping the day-to-day, keeping an eye on the market, making sure that when's a good time to start disposing of these assets. Those are typically the thought process behind asset management fees. Now, the percentages that syndicators and fund managers typically charge for asset management fees ranges from about 1 to 2%. But the question really becomes 1 to 2% of what? So that what, most of the time, is the amount of money that have been raised from the investors. So it's that capital accounts that is typically used. Some people prefer to use gross income. Other people even use net operating income. Those obviously would be lower amounts of fees, and the reasoning is because they don't want to be charging excess fees. They may be making their money elsewhere, like in the splits, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Besides the asset management fee, a lot of developers of real estate, will charge a development supervision fee. Now, this is different than a developer's fee, like the regular fee to actually be doing the development itself. But it's that relationship between the syndication or the fund itself with the developer that's being covered here. A lot of times that supervision fee is around 10%. 10% of hard and soft costs as they're incurred. That's just a general ballpark that I see probably more often than not. Another type of fee that we oftentimes see is property management fees. Now, a lot of people will put their property management out to a third party, and that's definitely a good idea because your specialty is, in this case, in the fund or in the property or in the asset management itself for the syndication. Now, if you own a property management company, you're obviously going to keep that yourself and be earning those fees. Also, it's worth thinking about, maybe you want to keep the property management itself if it's something like a triple net property where there's actually not that much property management that goes on, and you may be able to pass that off to the lessors of the property, the lessees of the property itself. So property management, it's still a fee, and so it still is part of what I consider part of the fees. Whether you're keeping it, then we certainly put it in there, or if you're not keeping it, we'll probably just make reference that it's being paid to a third party. Another type of fee would be the acquisition fee or a disposition fee. Acquisition and disposition fees are typically around 1%, 1.5% of the purchase or sale price of the asset. This is for all the work that goes into actually acquiring or disposing of the asset. So gathering due diligence material, reviewing all those things, that takes a lot of time, and it should be compensated for that. Lastly, the normal fee category would be real estate agent fees. Real estate agent fees I put here, even though probably if you're doing a real estate deal itself, those are getting paid anyway. But if you as a sponsor are getting paid those fees, it needs to be discussed, and this is just the best place to put it when we're talking about management fees. The reason we need to disclose it is not only because it's a fee there, but it also represents a conflict of interest. It is possible, and a lot of times we'll disclose that it's reasonable to believe that maybe the sales price could have been higher if it wasn't being represented by somebody who also had the split loyalty. Or the purchase price might have been lower. It's definitely not the case all the time, but we like to put it in there just so that we've made it very clear that there is a conflict of interest, but we've now disclosed it. There's a few other kinds of fees that are less common than the fees we just talked about. That would include like a finance fee. So the fee associated with putting a loan together and making sure the financing is there. That fee is generally somewhere between 0.5% to as high as 1.5% for the amount of for that work. And it's all based on the amount of the loan that's being got, not on any other part. Another kind of fee that happens from time to time is a marketing fee. A lot of times you'll see this if a broker-dealer is involved, because you'll have a marketing fee as well, which is the cost of putting all the material together for the broker-dealer so that they can do their work in finding investors. Lastly would be like a startup fee, so a startup cost. So this is normally a reimbursable expense anyway, those costs, but the startup fee itself is for the work of putting together the syndication itself and that body of work. It's not very common, and normally if it's there, it's somewhere between 1% and 2% of the total amount that's raised, but it's not that common. Now, so fees in general should be thought of as your income. It's probably being taxed as income for you. So as you begin earning these fees, it's probably paid out upon receipt of completing the work. So the IRS is going to say it's income, and it's probably is counted as such. Different than fees is splits. So the splits we can think about as the profit part. So you have your regular income, but the other piece of the puzzle is the profit that you're making from having done all this work. So it's not the income side, but it's that profit piece. A lot of times, and you should definitely speak with your accountant about this and make sure that it's kosher, but a lot of times what we'll do is syndicators will put those splits in on the capital gains side of their returns, then it have a lower tax rate. Now, they need to basically have invested money, have money at risk in order to be doing that. But again, talk with your accountant and see if this is an avenue that's available to you, because you can save a lot of money and you'll make more money, and that will be in your pocket at the end of the day. There's three kinds of basic splits that are out there in the world. And so the first one that's definitely the most common would be a waterfall split with or without a preferred return. So the preferred return is that percentage that you're guaranteeing gets paid to the investor before any other distribution of profits gets split out. So they get their money back and they get any sort of they get whatever that preferred return is as that's first in line. There may or may not be a catch-up for the manager, but that's not really relevant to this conversation. Other videos talk about that I've put out. So that waterfall that has the preferred may or may not have a preferred return. It may or may not have a catch-up. And then at some point it will have a split, like you oftentimes hear about 80-20 or 70-30. Those are the splits. Typically it's about 70% or 80% or 60% or whatever that percentage is goes to the investor, and the remainder goes to the sponsor That's not always the case. It always depends on how the whole financial structure has been set up. I've done deals where only 10% of the profits go to the investors, where 90% goes to the sponsors, because they've given the investors so much reward as part of a preferred return or something like that, that they will want to make it something marketable that would still basically still be investable, but still make a lot of money for themselves as well. The next kind would be straight equity. So you've got a property, you're buying it for $5 million, but the reality is that you're actually buying it for $4,500,000, and you're charging to your investors it as if it was a $5 million property. You're taking 10% off for your own equity. So you're keeping 10% of the deal, and they're getting the other part. I call this straight equity. The reason, or sponsors equity is another name I could use it sometimes for it. The reason why this is a great deal for you is you're guaranteed you're going to get paid. So if the property sells, even if it sells for $3 million, you're going to get that 10% of that $3 million. You're going to get that $300,000 payday, even if it goes under market. So it works out very well for sponsors. Individual investors may or may not like it. They may object or have questions to it. And if your deal works for it, great. If it doesn't, then you probably should choose some other avenue. The third kind is what I call a harvest promote. And this is actually pretty rare, but I think it's important to talk about because it is out there in the world. A harvest promote says, okay, we're going to sell the property or sell all the assets in year 5 or whatever that time is. Once we've sold, we're going to return all the money to investors. Once investors have been paid back, at that point, the sponsor is going to take the first 10% of profits for themselves, and then the rest will be given out either as a split or given out as straight to the investors. So that way the sponsor is, as long as it's profitable, is going to be making good money on it. But it puts the relief on the side of the investor that, hey, at least I know I'm going to get my money back before the sponsor makes any money. So those are the general types of splits. Now, splits, again, think about those as the profit center. So that's you profiting from it, not the regular pay that you receive for day-to-day work. So I hope you found this video helpful, because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to talk about these two categories that are going on. Splits and fees. Now, many people come to me every day and ask me about this, or what sort of split should I have, or what sort of fees should I be charging? And the answer is, well, let's look at your numbers. Let's see what you're doing. When I get hired, most of the time I go through in detail the financial picture of it, and I'll give up my opinion as to where I think they're at in the market. If I think that they're charging a lot of money in terms of fees against investors, I'll let my clients know that, because I want their product to be marketable at the end of the day. It doesn't do anybody any good if they can't get investors out there. So, but I also want my sponsors and my fund managers to make as much money as possible. So many times I'll go through what those numbers are, and we'll talk about, well, maybe if we tweak this, or maybe if we change this, we'll get a better return that will be more marketable. Because really, at the end of the day, your investors care not only about what the story is about it, which I do believe is probably the most important thing that you have to sell them, but the second most important thing is that number of what that return is, because they need to understand what it is. I mean, if it's an 8% return or a 20% return, whatever it is, if it's something that they're interested in, they're going to invest. So ultimately, we want to end up with a good, solid return that they can rationally believe in, so that they can then buy into your story and be a part of your vision that you've got as your syndication or fund takes off. My name is Tilda Moschetti. I am a syndication attorney with the Moschetti Syndication Law Group. If we can help you, please don't hesitate to give us a call.